The psychology of people who make money but stay broke. There's a strange kind of frustration that almost no one talks about. It's when you're making good money, maybe even more than you ever imagined you would, and yet somehow, it never feels like enough. You look at your bank account and think, where did it all go? And the most confusing part is this: from the outside, it looks like you're doing everything right. So how can someone earn more and still feel broke? If you want to understand the real psychology behind this, subscribe now, because what you're about to see has very little to do with how much money you make, and everything to do with how your mind works around it. This pattern is more common than people think. In fact, recent data shows that a surprising number of high earners, people making over 6 figures, are still living paycheck to paycheck. Not because they're irresponsible in an obvious way, not because they're making reckless decisions every day, but because their spending grows quietly, almost invisibly, alongside their income. It doesn't feel like overspending, it feels like progress. At first, everything makes sense. You start earning more, so naturally you upgrade a few things. Maybe you move to a better place. Maybe you start eating out more often. Maybe you replace things you've had for years with better versions. None of it feels extreme. In fact, it feels deserved. You worked for this. You earned this. And slowly, without noticing, your lifestyle expands to match your income. This is where things start to shift in a way most people don't realize. Because the problem isn't that people spend more when they earn more. That part is expected. The real problem is how quickly those upgrades stop feeling like choices and start feeling like necessities. What used to be a luxury becomes your new normal. The nicer apartment isn't a treat anymore, it's just where you live. The more expensive car isn't a reward, it's just your car. The frequent dinners, the subscriptions, the services, they all blend into your routine. And once something becomes part of your normal life, it's incredibly difficult to step back from it. Psychologists and behavioral researchers often refer to this as lifestyle creep. It's a kind of silent inflation. Your income rises, but so does your standard of living, almost in perfect sync. And because it happens gradually, you don't feel like you're making bigger decisions. You just feel like you're maintaining your life. But here's the part that makes this so powerful and so dangerous. As your lifestyle expands, your fixed costs begin to rise. These are the expenses that are hard to reduce once you commit to them. Rent or mortgage, car payments, insurance, ongoing subscriptions. These aren't flexible. They lock you into a certain level of spending. And that's when the trap fully forms. Because now, your income isn't just supporting your life, it's sustaining a structure that requires that level of income to exist. If your income drops, or even if it just stops growing, the pressure doesn't go away. In many cases, it increases. And suddenly, earning more doesn't feel like freedom anymore. It feels like maintenance. This is why so many people feel stuck, even at higher income levels, not because they lack discipline, but because their financial life has been shaped, step by step, into something that quietly demands everything they earn. And what makes this even more interesting is that this process doesn't happen in isolation. It's not just about personal choices, it's also about what people around you seem to have, and what you start to believe is normal. And this is where the psychology becomes even more subtle, because most people don't feel like they're trying to impress anyone. They're not consciously thinking, I need to keep up. But the reference point they use to define a normal life has quietly shifted. Decades ago, people mostly compared themselves to others in similar situations. Neighbors, co-workers with similar roles, people living similar lives. The comparison was horizontal. It was grounded. But over time, that changed. As work environments became more hierarchical and exposure to higher earners increased, people began comparing themselves upward, not to those at their level, but to those above them. And today, that effect is amplified in a way that's almost impossible to escape. Through media, social platforms, and even entertainment, the lifestyles people are exposed to are heavily skewed toward the top. What looks average is often far from it. Spacious homes, constant dining out, travel, premium everything. It's presented as normal, when in reality, it reflects a much smaller, higher income group. Without realizing it, people begin to internalize this as the standard, not as luxury, but as baseline. And once that happens, something important shifts in how decisions are made. Because now, spending isn't just about utility, it becomes tied to identity, to belonging, to self-perception. The house you live in, the car you drive, the clothes you wear, these aren't just functional choices. They become signals. Signals that communicate where you are, how well you're doing, and how you fit into the world around you. Research often points to these visible categories, housing, transportation, and clothing, as the main areas where this kind of signaling happens. Not because people are shallow, but because these are the most visible parts of life. They're easy to compare, easy to notice, and because of that, they carry more psychological weight. But here's where the mechanism deepens. Because once you make a single upgrade, something slightly above your usual pattern, it rarely stays isolated. There's a well-documented effect, sometimes referred to as the Diderot effect, that explains this chain reaction. When you introduce a new, higher-end item into your life, it changes how everything else around it feels. Suddenly, older things start to feel out of place. Not because they stopped working, but because they no longer match. There's a perceived mismatch, a lack of coherence. And that discomfort pushes you, often subtly, to upgrade other things to restore that sense of unity. It might start with something simple, a new TV. Then the living room feels outdated, so you update the furniture. Then the lighting. Then the decor. None of these decisions feel irrational in isolation. Each one feels like a small improvement, but together they form a pattern, a cascade. And this is how spending accelerates without feeling excessive, because it's not driven by one big decision. It's driven by a series of small, connected ones, each one justified, each one reasonable, each one building on the last. Over time, this creates a kind of momentum, a lifestyle that doesn't just reflect your income, but actively expands to absorb it. And at this point, the question stops being, "Why am I spending so much?" and becomes something much more interesting. What is actually driving these decisions, if I'm not fully aware of them? To understand that, you have to go one layer deeper into the beliefs people carry about money, often without realizing it. Because behind every spending pattern, there's usually a script running quietly in the background. Psychologist Brad Klontz describes these as money scripts. They're unconscious beliefs about money, usually formed early in life, that shape how people earn, spend, and save as adults. And the important part is this: most people don't know they have them. For some, money becomes tied to identity. There's a belief, often subtle, that your worth is connected to what you can afford. Not in an obvious, superficial way, but in the quiet feeling that you're doing well if your lifestyle reflects success. This is sometimes called a money status script, and it can lead people to spend more, not to impress others directly, but to feel aligned with who they believe they should be. For others, there's a different script, the idea that more money will finally fix everything. That once they reach a certain income level, the stress will disappear, the pressure will ease, and life will feel stable. This is known as a money worship pattern. And the paradox is that it often leads people to keep chasing higher income, while their spending rises at the same pace, keeping that sense of almost there just out of reach. These scripts don't operate logically, they operate emotionally. And that's why even highly intelligent, disciplined people can find themselves stuck in patterns that don't seem to make sense from the outside. But beliefs are only part of the story. Because even when people know what they should do, save more, spend less, plan ahead, they often don't act on it. And this is where cognitive biases come in. One of the strongest is something called present bias. It's the tendency to give more weight to what feels good now, while discounting what matters later. In simple terms, the brain values immediate rewards more than future ones. So, spending today feels real. Saving for the future feels abstract. This is connected to how the brain processes decisions. There's a fast, automatic system, sometimes called System 1, that drives quick, emotional reactions. And there's a slower, more analytical system, System 2, that requires effort and attention. The problem is that most spending decisions happen in the first system. They're quick, intuitive, and often triggered by context, an ad, a mood, a moment. And by the time the analytical system kicks in, the decision is already made. There's also another force at play: loss aversion. Psychologically, losing something feels about twice as painful as gaining something feels good. And this has a powerful effect on lifestyle. Because once someone gets used to a certain level of comfort, certain habits, conveniences, or environments, cutting back doesn't feel neutral. It feels like a loss, even if it's financially wise, even if it's temporary. The emotional resistance is real. And this is why it's so hard for people to downshift their lifestyle, even when they know they should. But here's where the story becomes more nuanced. Not everyone who earns well and stays broke is driven by the same motives. In some cases, the spending isn't about status at all. It's about relief. In high-pressure professions, like law, medicine, or demanding corporate roles, people often trade time for income. Long hours, constant demands, high expectations. And over time, that creates a different kind of fatigue, not just physical, but emotional. And when that builds up, spending can become a form of escape. Not in a reckless way, in a controlled, almost justified way. A better meal, a more comfortable environment, a trip, something that feels like a reward, or even a recovery. Researchers sometimes refer to this as escape spending. It's not about showing success, it's about coping with the cost of sustaining it. And in those cases, the pattern looks similar on the surface: high income, low savings, but the underlying psychology is completely different. Which brings us to a deeper point, because at some level, this isn't just about money. It's about how people relate to their own lives. Because over time, a person's lifestyle stops being just a set of choices and becomes a reflection of who they believe they are. The environment they live in, the routines they maintain, the standards they normalize. These things start to define identity. And once identity is involved, the stakes change. It's no longer just, can I afford this? It becomes, is this who I am now? And that's why the pattern is so hard to break. Because reducing your lifestyle doesn't feel like adjusting numbers. It feels like stepping backwards, like undoing progress, like becoming a previous version of yourself that you worked hard to leave behind. Even when the numbers clearly say it would be the smarter move, this creates a paradox that most people don't see coming. The more your income grows, the more expensive your life becomes to maintain. Not because you're careless, but because each upgrade raises the baseline. And once that baseline rises, everything else organizes around it. Your expectations, your habits, even your sense of what feels normal. So you don't feel richer, you just feel calibrated to a higher cost of living. And this is the core of why someone can make more money and still feel broke. It's not that the money disappears randomly, it's that it gets absorbed by a system that quietly expands to fit it. A system shaped by comparison, by habits, by unconscious beliefs, and by the natural way the human brain prioritizes comfort in the present over stability in the future. And once you see that, something important shifts. Because the solution is no longer just make more, it becomes change the structure. Research in behavioral finance suggests that awareness alone isn't enough to break this cycle. Knowing what's happening doesn't automatically change behavior. What tends to work is something more practical, small changes in how decisions are made. For example, introducing a simple delay before larger purchases, giving your analytical thinking time to catch up with your impulse. or automating savings so that money is moved before you even have the chance to spend it, or setting rules around future income, like committing to save a portion of every raise so your lifestyle doesn't expand at the same speed. These aren't dramatic changes, but they shift control. They move decisions away from impulse and closer to intention. And maybe the most important shift is this: understanding that being broke isn't always about a lack of money. Sometimes it's the result of a pattern that was never consciously designed, a pattern that felt like progress but quietly removed margin. So, if you've ever felt like your income should be enough, but somehow it never is, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not dealing with a simple problem. You're dealing with a system. And systems can be changed. If this video helped you see something you hadn't fully put into words before, let me know in the comments. And if you want more content that breaks down hidden patterns like this, clearly, honestly, and without noise, subscribe to the channel.